So did you hear the news? There's more than 2.9 billion people in America, England, and Canada who had their identity stolen, or at least their identity compromised in a recent data breach. If you do the quick math, you might discover that that is a lot of people for those just three countries. So this is a news headline that's probably getting a little bit more attention. It's a little bit hyperbolic in nature, but the reality is there was a very large data breach over the course of the past couple weeks, and it brought to my attention something that I don't think is discussed enough, especially when it relates to your personal finances, and that is proper identity theft protection, or at least taking the necessary steps so that you are as protected as you can be in our current environment. The reality is you're never going to be perfect. That's just the unfortunate nature of what we're dealing with today. But there are a few very simple steps that you can take to put yourself in a much better, safer, and more resilient position for identity theft protection, monitoring, and to ensure that if there is some type of data breach, you're better positioned to handle it and it not be something that's so disruptive that it effectively derails your life. Which is often what happens for most people that have a major identity theft issue. I'm Casey Fulp. I'm the owner and principal of Carriage House Planning. We are a fully independent, fee-only financial advising firm and wealth management firm. And I wanted to take some time today to share with you a few ideas around identity theft protection, a little bit of the history, but also cover with you some very simple steps that you can take to ensure that you are basically ahead of the crowd as far as protecting your identity and to make sure that you're in a better position going forward. You may be saying to yourself, but I have identity theft protection service from a third party. That's great. Or maybe my credit card monitors my identity for me. Also great. And I'm glad that you're using those tools. But the reality is you're missing a few things. So I want to cover a few things that you may not know about and also share with you again some additional ideas that you may take into account that will help secure your identity as you kind of take the next step. All right, so real quick, I thought a good place to start is to cover sort of a little bit of history around this concept of identity, credit scores, that type of thing. And I think that most of it is kind of common knowledge, right? We know what our identity is, or at least we think we do. But of course, with the advent of new technologies, with the combined efforts of surveillance, be it from government, so-called surveillance or non-surveillance, whatever you want to refer to that as, to something as simple as facial recognition technologies being used by corporations. Your identity is more and more at risk all the time. Now, we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to say the reality is that really post-1960s, going into the early 70s, your identity as it relates to your financial picture has been basically under attack. And it's presented as a very good thing for you. But the reality is maybe a little bit darker, a little bit more troublesome than you might think. Way back when, right, in the earliest days of let's just say the Americas and the development of what we now call the United States of America, little towns would have little shops pop up. The little shops would do business with the people in the town, and the shopkeepers would oftentimes extend credit to people because of the nature of money at the time and the nature of banking, and the systems would allow for or necessitate a bit more kind of spit and a handshake relationships between buyer and seller. You were all part of the same community. Generally speaking, you were going to pay, make good on your debt. So it really wasn't an issue. But then as our society and our small communities expanded into larger communities and then into cities, what ended up happening is a lot of the chambers of commerce or businesses would kind of band together and say, okay, like we all have a lot of the same customers. Let's kind of help each other record who's good at paying their debts and who's not. So that way, if John Jay is great at paying his debts, but Dave Smith is, or whoever else is terrible at paying their debts, we know when they come walking into our store, and for that reason we can kind of better calculate or tabulate who we should and shouldn't be extending credit to. We can imagine that would accelerate as time goes on and as the United States develops. And of course, Europe and other countries, nations, continents have their own approaches in history. But for the sake of our conversation, let's look here in just the U.S. And then what ended up basically happening is companies saw a ripe opportunity that their business would be tracking and recording the creditworthiness of an individual. Now, this kind of coincided right around the same time with the end of World War I. We had the Social Security Act effectively put into place, so Social Security numbers were created. So now we have government identity being tracked, and then we have kind of creditworthiness identity being tracked by a bunch of little companies. And then again, through various iterations of an exceedingly rapid pace of government growth, and that is something that needs to be acknowledged in this history, but also in the growth of the economy and commerce, we reached this point where all of a sudden, all these little credit agencies weren't kind of up to snuff. They weren't doing the job well enough, because now we had a lot of interstate commerce. We had the the Eisenhower Act that effectively developed the interstate system of roads, which allowed for more commerce and trade across state lines. And we can see very quickly that the once upon a time small town solution just wasn't going to be adequate anymore. So along comes what at that time they weren't established in their current form, but we end up getting these big three credit reporting bureaus. Now, this all matters as it relates to identity theft and your financial security, because in essence, between 1970 and 1971, the Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed by Congress. Now, this effectively stated that, and as with any congressional act, it's all for your benefit, of course. There's no cost to you, and we know that's never the case. But the act was designed to basically state that Americans have a right to know if their credit has been affected by some reporting bank or institution. So in other words, if kind of going back to that small town scenario, if one store told the all other kind of group of stores, hey, this guy's no good at paying his debts, the Fair Credit Reporting Act would basically state that the American citizen has a right to know that store told the other stores he's not good at paying his debt. With that, what really happened, and this is kind of the cost to the American population, is it cemented in basically the three major, and then there's one minor, credit reporting bureaus. Because what it did was it monopolized control over credit reporting, and it vanquished these little independent agencies, and it brought to as with a lot of government acts, it effectively created a monopoly system where these big three were now the anointed ones. Now, if you want to look at some really unfortunate history and just to kind of see the dark side of this, feel free to go and look at the dark side of the credit reporting bureaus, because they have very tainted histories. They have bad track records of data security, of good business practice. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They're not good. They're not good guys, but they were effectively, again, anointed as the keepers of the data as it relates to our financial well-being. Should not be missed that at the exact same time, it was only a year later that Nixon effectively took the dollar fully off of the gold standard, whereas back in FDR's time in World War II, the gold standard was, let's say, kneecapped, but Nixon officially took us off the gold standard. So our currency really went on the full fiat basis that it currently operates. And why all of this matters is by doing that, we effectively created the credit-based consumption economy that we currently live in. It should not be looked past for anyone that was the turning point where America and debt became, best friends for life, BFFs, as my daughter would say. Unfortunately, right, we still see the consequences of this every day. Not only is it the American behavior to effectively use debt to fund their current behavior, their current activities, and that's not to say debt's always a bad thing. Debt can be a very good thing. But it's become a commonplace for the average American household, either by necessity or by desire, to use debt in, I would say, fashions that are probably irresponsible. But the government's doing it just the same. So, it's kind of one of those, everybody's guilty. But that's really the foundation of it. And all of this history matters because, again, I wanted to highlight the fact that we have these 3 credit reporting bureaus, one additional one that is and isn't a credit reporting bureau. They have a very checkered history. They have a lot of bad business practices. Most recently, a lot of people may remember the Experian credit breach, which happened, I believe, in 2015. And that's where basically, I think it was something to the tune of like 250 million Americans, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on that figure, had their full identities kind of exposed. And then Experian had supposedly major financial consequences, but the idea that they're still even operating after that is beyond me. I mean, that just goes to show it goes to prove their sort of monopolistic status. Because if any other company whose sole job was effectively to maintain all of this data and keep it secure, that is their core business. It's one thing if your Home Depots or your Targets or whatever it is, has a data breach. Not to say it should be excused, but it is excused because that's not they're doing their best they can. We live in this constantly evolving tech world. I get it, blah, blah, blah. But these credit reporting bureaus, that is their job. That is their sole job. And they failed miserably at it. But all of them have failed at it in the past. Experian was just one in the more kind of modern tech age where it happened. So it got a lot of coverage, but they're still doing exactly what they've been doing. Not a lot changed. They had some financial consequences, as I mentioned. So fast forward to most recently, we are seeing a massive swath of new hackers, data breaches. It's not a new thing, but the concentration, or the volume rather, of these events is growing. I had said back in 2020 when we shut down and we started having work from home, I had spoken with a lot of clients, I had spoken with a lot of folks, and I had said data security is not ready for this, because a lot of corporations, a lot of companies had figured out a pretty decent ironclad system to maintain their data propriety or their data security in their offices. But now all of a sudden we have individuals at home where the firewalls aren't the same, or the data security protections aren't the same. The behaviors on their computer are going to be a little bit different than they would be at the office. They may be doing more personal stuff on their computer or seeking out websites that would otherwise be malicious. But then they also have a little bit more control over their devices, even if it's a computer issued by the company. So that matters for the individual household, you, the me of the world, but it also matters for the companies themselves, because now all of a sudden their data is at a greater risk because you have more people working from home, working remotely, working on unsecured networks, working in ways that would allow for a higher propensity for breaches. All right, so I build all this up because I wanted to explain the history of how we got to where we are, the dark side of it, because you need to know that, and also what we're looking at in this current landscape, so then I can tell you why the steps I'm going to offer you are going to be beneficial or helpful for you. So in this current landscape, as a client of mine who works in data security, who works in threat detection, he's brilliant in what he does, but for his corporation or his company that he works for, he said, we basically live under what we call assumed breach status, meaning we just assume we've been breached and we operate accordingly. And the idea behind that really, I think, resonated with me when he explained that to me, because that's the way the average household needs to think. And the reason I say that is most of us don't have the technological wherewithal, the technology knowledge base to know all the threats that are potentially attacking us. I'm not a computer programmer. I'm pretty safe with my habits, but I don't fully know what risks I'm exposed to on a daily basis. It's one of those you don't know what you don't know. So by operating under this belief that you've already been breached, that's how you really ensure protection. Now, that may not be feasible or appropriate for everyone. The reason I say that is one of the best steps you can take if you are assumed to have been breached is freezing your credit reports. Now, it's a fairly simple process. I'm not going to say it's completely easy. It's a bit of a hassle in a lot of cases, or I guess the better way to say it is unfreezing can be the real hassle. But by freezing your credit report, what you're doing is you're going to each of those 3 credit reporting agencies. The 4th one you can go to, but it doesn't have the same net effect. So while I'm not going to say do or don't, that's not my place, I would say the most important thing to do is freeze it at the big 3. Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Those are the big 3 that you want to go directly to their sites, and they each have a process for freezing your credit. Now, what you're doing when you're freezing your credit report, you're basically saying it is frozen in time. It is locked. There are no new lines of credit that can be opened in your name. And anyone who goes and tries to pull your credit to issue you a line of credit will deny you because they cannot access your credit report. Now, this matters because you may forget, and then you're sitting there at some store checking out and they say, hey, you can save 40% if you open a new credit card, and you're a financially responsible person who doesn't have a ton of credit cards, and you say to yourself, you know what, I shop here regularly, I'll allow myself this one instance. You go and fill out the paperwork and they tell you you're denied. Right? That's because your credit is frozen. So the time you want to freeze credit is when you know for a fact you will not be opening new lines of credit, new loans, you will not be borrowing, or you're not going for a job where they're going to do a credit check. You're not going to, right? This is the unfortunate nature of this monopolized system that we have, because credit checks, credit reporting is by and large used well outside of our financial lives. So you have to be somewhat aware of what you're doing. But that is the assumed breach protocol, is to freeze your credit. I really encourage this for a lot of retirees, folks who aren't in those years where they're amassing credit, right? They're trying to basically eliminate credit in most cases, or debt, and they're also financially secure and sound. They're not needing to borrow in most cases. That is ideal for them. Now, one of the other steps to dealing with this in an assumed breach approach is contacting the Social Security Administration. And this is one of the most overlooked pieces. And this is why when you say, why I have credit monitoring, or my credit card does it, I would say, but it's not covering the whole picture. The reason I say this is Social Security hacks are one of the number 1 threats right now. Not only because Social Security laws have changed dramatically over the past 5-8 years, but also there are nuances to Social Security that the average American doesn't really know. Things like file and suspend status, things like spousal benefits over personal benefits. The list is actually much longer than that, but those are a couple right off the top that a lot of people may not even be aware of. But for that reason, the scammers know if they can get in there, they can do things that you wouldn't even know they were doing. And that's completely changed the structure of your Social Security benefits. And I will tell you what, undoing it with the Social Security Administration, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it is an absolute pain unlike anything you'll ever encounter. As if going to the DMV or the Social Security Administration office is bad enough, it is. This is way worse. So by contacting the Social Security Administration, you can actually request from them that they put a 2nd and 3rd layer of protection on your Social Security account. Now, you can do this when you're young, you can do this when you're old, it doesn't matter. This isn't like I have to be taking a Social Security benefit. What you're doing is you're putting effectively what might be like 2-factor authentication on your Social Security. That way, no one, because again, these are the types of threats that you need to be aware exist out there. There are people that will go and file unemployment or rather disability claims on your Social Security number at their address. And then all of a sudden they're collecting disability on your benefit and you don't even know it. You're not even aware, because they've got all your information and they go in there, they request it, and then they're getting it sent to them. All right. So by going directly to the Social Security Administration and telling them, I feel as though I've been breached, my identity is potentially at risk, I want to put additional layers of protection on my Social Security, they will be able to do that, and it's actually a very common request that they have. Again, undoing these things is where the real hassle comes in. But again, if you're trying to prevent yourself from dealing with a really big hassle like identity theft, these are steps that you can easily take now that do require a little bit of extra work on the back end, but I think you'll be thankful, again, if you're not having a lot of moving pieces going on in your life financially right now. Going back to more the monitoring side of things, one of the best things that you can do, even if you have identity monitoring from some third-party provider, your credit card's doing it or whatever, do yourself a favor, please. Go to annualcreditreport.com. Don't go to freecreditreport.com. Don't go to, no. Annualcreditreport.com. That is the only federally authorized place to obtain, and again, this was a byproduct of the Fair Credit, the Fair Credit Reporting Act in 7071. By proxy, and then a revision of the law in, I think it was 96. But you are allowed to get one credit report annually from each of the 3 credit reporting bureaus. Now, what I recommend to clients to do, because you get one per year, it's not to say that this is perfect. This isn't a perfect solution. But because you get one per year, what I actually recommend is request one every 4 months from each of the 3. The premise behind the 3 is that they may not all have all of your information. Chances are they do, but they may not. So by having all 3, you can see what all 3 have record of you, in their record keeping. You can request them all at the exact same time, but then what happens in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, up to 12, until you can request all 3 again? You don't know. So that's why you're kind of taking a little bit of a risk, because you're saying, well, I hope that, let's say, TransUnion has all my information. Maybe they missed something, but in 4 months, I'm going to pull Experian. And by that point in time, maybe they caught something that happened over the last 4 months. But the idea here is you're pulling your credit report. And that's truly what it is. It's your credit report. And when you pull your credit report, what you're really looking at it for is not so much, it's not like how much of a balance is on my existing credit cards, because that's not what identity theft is really all about. It affects it, don't get me wrong, but that's the real threat. Oftentimes are cases where you don't know your identity's been compromised. Someone has purchased it on some sort of a black market, and they're actually using your identity because they don't have a, let's say, legal status in the United States. It's a bit of a hot button item right now. And there are a lot of people here who are not here legally. And obtaining, let's say, an automobile loan or a checking and savings account at a bank is challenging. And they're willing to pay to get someone else's identity to obtain that loan so they can go and get a job, let's say. Right? They need a loan for a car so they can go to a job. Let's assume there's nothing nefarious here other than they're here illegally and they're doing very illegal things, but they're trying to, let's say, live the American dream. Like, I'm trying to keep my opinion out of this, but I kind of want to paint the picture, because they'll then apply for a loan, they'll have a loan, it's technically your loan, but they may even be paying it off. You may well never know that loan exists. Now, maybe one day they get a phone call from home that grandma's sick and they go, all right, I'm out of here. And then they stop paying the loan. 3 years in, you didn't even know this thing existed, right? When you pull your credit report, you're going to see line item by line item the existing lines of credit and then recently closed lines of credit. It's also going to have recent addresses of record. It's going to have the kind of information that you can spot check and you can tell very quickly, what is this? This doesn't look familiar. Now, I will warn you, one of the things you may want to be considerate of is a lot of times there's bank acquisitions that occur. So you may have had a loan with, Jim Bob's Bank in Paducah, Kentucky, and Jim Bob's bank got bought out by, Bank of America, your credit report may reflect a Bank of America loan that was closed 4 years ago, and you're saying, I never had a Bank of America loan. It may have been Jim Bob's bank loan, and now all of a sudden it's a Bank of America loan. So you want to have a little bit of discretion when you're looking at the line items, but the idea is you're checking the line items and you're verifying that every existing credit line and closed credit line, as well as addresses, are accurate to you. If they're not, you immediately want to call the credit bureaus and you want to ask for clarity, verification, and then if necessary, freezing your credit. There are additional steps that can be taken. For legal reasons, I'm not going to walk you through those right now. I don't want this to be perceived as legal advice, but for identity correction or identity theft steps, I am going to include a website link for the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. I'm actually going to bring it up on my computer very quickly because the site that I'll include here is the federal government's step-by-step process, effectively, for remedying identity theft and credit hacks and those types of things. So I'll include that here so that you can read verbatim from the federal site, what steps you would need to take. But to summarize, credit reporting bureaus are not there in your best interest. They're not looking out for you. Their data is getting breached and hacked, and they usually suffer very little consequence. There are tons of other threats out there. As far as data security, computer security, and that type of thing, there are steps that you can be taking. I am not prepared enough to go through those here, but I maybe in the future I'll put out a little information about that. But as far as your credit is concerned, I do believe that it is wise to consider operating as a household under the credit assumed breach approach. Other note for parents, don't forget about your minor children. And I'm saying don't forget about them not only in pulling their credit report. And you say to yourself, well, what are you talking about? My kid's 5 years old. They don't have any. No, that's the point. You do need to go check that out. Because if they have a line of credit opened in their name, someone has bought your kid's identity. That is going to be a lifetime of trouble for them if you don't solve it now. Okay? On top of that, Social Security, right? Make sure that you're checking their Social Security as well. Call the Social Security Administration or create a login on ssa.gov to view your child's Social Security benefits online. It's not a perfect spot check, but it is a little bit easier than sitting on wait on a call with the Social Security Administration. But you can get some valuable information in terms of any history that's being reported on their Social Security number. Remember, these agencies are massive. The government has a ineptitude that simply cannot be overstated, and their deficiency as an institution is on full display every single day. We live with this implicit belief that the government is taking good care of us and that they have tremendous security measures in place and they're doing everything right. And the reality is that no, they're not. It is your responsibility to make sure that all of these things are covered. It's not easy. It's not fun. I hate that I'm sitting here having to tell this to you. But by taking these steps now, it prevents those catastrophic events in your life. And the reality is, here at Carriage House Planning, one of our number one kind of pillars of kind of principled beliefs is that you have two different variables in life. You have a bucket of controllable variables and a bucket of uncontrollable variables. As a planner and as an investment manager and as an individual who is helping people walk through their financial lives with a great degree of success, we are focused solely on the controllable variables and controlling them in a way that they mitigate, eliminate, or at least minimize at the best of our ability those uncontrollable variables. These are steps that you can take now to mitigate the uncontrollable. You can sit there and worry about the uncontrollable all day long until you're blue in the face. I wouldn't recommend it. I would instead recommend taking that same energy and apply it to the variables that you're in control of. This is one of those very easy ones that you can be in control of. It's not a perfect solution, but it's going to put you leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else and of where you are right now, which is the most important thing. I hope you have found this helpful. I hope that this has been insightful for you. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, if you just simply want to chat about your current situation, give us a call, 813-851-2231, or better yet, visit our website at www.carriagehouseplanning.com. And in the top right corner, you'll see a button that says schedule an introductory meeting, schedule an introduction. Do that, set up some time, let's chat about your situation, and we can identify whether or not Carriage House Planning can play a role in you achieving your financial freedom. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of summer, and fingers crossed, fall will be here soon. All right, bye-bye.